Sometimes the sweetest revenge is just being right. In June 2024, legendary coach Geno Auriemma sat down for an interview that would come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. With the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years being right about almost everything in women's basketball, he made a prediction about Caitlin Clark that seemed reasonable at the time. He called her fan base delusional for believing she'd finish top 5 in MVP voting her rookie season. He said she wasn't built for the physical demands of the WNBA. He claimed she was heading to the wrong team with the wrong supporting cast. He insisted she was being set up for failure, that the hype would crash against the reality of professional basketball. 4 months later, Clark finished exactly 4th in MVP voting, won Rookie of the Year unanimously, made the All-WNBA First Team, and shattered every attendance and viewership record in league history. The so-called delusional fans had been right all along. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This wasn't the first time Geno had underestimated her. Years before any of this, when she was just a high school kid from Iowa with big dreams and an even bigger jump shot, he never even bothered to recruit her. That decision, that moment of complete dismissal, might have accidentally changed the trajectory of women's basketball forever. UConn was a dream. For Caitlin Clark growing up in Des Moines, there was no bigger goal than playing for the Hawkeyes, the program that turned talented players into legends, where championships felt like birthright and greatness was practically guaranteed. She watched their tournament runs religiously, studied their offensive system, and imagined herself running the point in that navy blue uniform with a Husky logo across her chest. Every great guard in women's basketball seemed to have one thing in common. They'd worn that jersey at some point. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, the list went on forever. UConn wasn't just a college program. It was a finishing school for future Hall of Famers. But despite all her talent, despite lighting up every gym she played in, despite putting up numbers that made recruiting analysts do double takes, the call never came. Geno Auriemma never visited her home in Iowa, never sat down with her family over dinner to talk about the program's tradition. Her AAU coach barely heard from him. The recruitment that Clark dreamed about simply never materialized. Years later, long after she'd become a household name, Clark would open up about how much that silence hurt. She told reporters she wanted UConn to recruit her just to say she got recruited by them, just to have that validation from the program she'd idolized her whole life. That admission revealed everything. This wasn't about entitlement or expecting special treatment. It was about a kid who genuinely loved what UConn represented and couldn't understand why they didn't see her the same way she saw them. But to Geno, she was essentially invisible. His reasoning made sense on the surface. He'd already secured a commitment from Paige Bueckers, the consensus #1 recruit in the country, another elite point guard who fit his system perfectly, who had the pedigree and the rankings and everything UConn typically looked for. Why chase another guard when you already had the best? Why complicate your roster with 2 ball-dominant players when you could build around one? It was classic Geno logic. Efficient, strategic, proven over decades of success. Except Caitlin Clark wasn't just another guard fighting for minutes. She was a generational talent hiding in plain sight in the Midwest. And while Geno focused on securing the player everyone expected him to get, he completely missed the one nobody saw coming. The one who would eventually redefine what was possible in the sport. For 3 decades, Geno Auriemma built an empire that felt absolutely untouchable. 11 national championships spread across different eras. Dozens of All-Americans who went on to dominate professional leagues around the world. A recruiting pipeline so powerful that getting a scholarship offer from UConn wasn't just an honor. It was essentially a guaranteed ticket to stardom. His words shaped the entire landscape of women's basketball. His approval meant everything to players, parents, and coaches. When Geno said someone was special, the whole sport listened. When he passed on a recruit, other programs took notice and wondered what they were missing. Players who wore the Husky uniform became household names almost automatically. Diana Taurasi became a global icon. Maya Moore was unstoppable. Breanna Stewart won everything there was to win. Each one a legend sculpted and refined in Geno's image, molded by a system, elevated by his platform. His track record was so dominant that doubting him seemed foolish. Why question a man who'd been right more times than anyone could count? But empires don't crumble overnight. They erode slowly, one missed opportunity at a time, one miscalculation that seems insignificant until years later when you look back and realize that was the moment everything changed. And the decision not to recruit Caitlin Clark, to essentially ignore her, while she was right there setting Iowa high school gyms on fire, would become the crack that started everything. The first sign that maybe the old system wasn't as infallible as everyone believed. Clark committed to Iowa, and most analysts barely noticed. A few recruiting websites covered it with standard press release language, but there was no buzz, no excitement, no sense that something special was about to happen. It wasn't a powerhouse program. Iowa didn't have UConn's mystique, or Stanford's academic prestige, or the championship tradition of other elite schools. In the eyes of most experts, it looked like a good player choosing comfort and proximity to home over real competition. A safe choice that would lead to good stats, but no meaningful legacy. But what Iowa had was something more valuable than tradition. It had freedom. A stage where Clark could be herself completely unfiltered, unlimited, unrestrained by anyone else's system or philosophy. From her very first game in an Iowa uniform, it was immediately clear something different was happening. She launched three-pointers from distances that made opposing coaches physically wince. Her passes defied basic physics and geometry. Her energy and confidence turned quiet college gyms into roaring theaters. She played with a joy and creativity that felt almost rebellious, like she was daring people to tell her she couldn't do something. By her sophomore year, Iowa games were becoming must-watch events for hardcore basketball fans. By her junior year, she was breaking attendance records across the country, and not just at Iowa's arena. Visiting arenas that used to pull a few thousand fans for women's games suddenly sold out weeks in advance when Clark came to town. Networks scrambled to adjust their broadcast schedules to feature her matchups. Highlight reels of her logo threes and no-look passes went viral with millions of views. She didn't just play basketball at an elite level. She made people who never cared about women's basketball suddenly care deeply about it. Families planned their weekends around watching her play. Kids wore her jersey. Analysts started comparing her impact to Stephen Curry, to Pete Maravich, to players who transcended their sport. And by the time her college career ended, she'd done something no player in NCAA history, men or women, had ever accomplished. She became the all-time leading scorer with over 3,900 points, surpassing legends who played in different eras with different rules. 2 straight Final Four appearances where Iowa, a program that had never been a serious championship contender, suddenly looked like they could win it all. A cultural movement that transcended the sport itself and brought women's basketball into mainstream conversation in ways it had never been before. Iowa wasn't a consolation prize or a backup plan. It became the absolute center of the basketball universe for 4 years. All because one legendary coach didn't see what was right in front of him. All because Geno Auriemma made a calculation that seemed smart at the time, but turned out to be the biggest recruiting miss of his storied career. Then came June 2024, and everything got personal. Caitlin Clark had just been drafted first overall to the Indiana Fever amid unprecedented hype and media attention. Her rookie season was about to begin, and the entire sports world was watching to see if she could translate her college dominance to professional level. The WNBA had never seen this kind of spotlight on a single player. During what should have been a routine appearance on the Dan Patrick Show, Geno Auriemma decided to share his unfiltered thoughts on Clark's future. And what he said was absolutely shocking in its dismissiveness. He didn't just express mild skepticism. He went after her fans directly, calling them delusional for predicting she'd finish 3rd or 4th in MVP voting her rookie season. He said she wasn't physically built for the grinding, physical nature of professional basketball. He claimed Indiana was the wrong franchise with the wrong pieces around her, that she needed a specific type of team to succeed, and the Fever weren't it. He insisted she was being set up for failure by unrealistic expectations. His tone throughout the interview wasn't just skeptical or cautious. It was dismissive, almost mocking, as if the entire phenomenon around Clark was some kind of mass delusion that would pop the moment she faced real competition. The backlash was immediate and intense. Fans erupted across social media, questioning why someone of Geno's stature would go out of his way to tear down a young player before she'd even played a professional game. Analysts who respected his legacy found the comments unnecessarily harsh and weirdly personal. Even people who agreed that rookie hype often exceeded reality thought he'd cross a line. But through all of it, Clark didn't respond. She didn't fire back on Twitter. She didn't address it in press conferences. She didn't defend herself or her fans in interviews. She just went to work, putting in the hours, focusing on her game, letting everyone else argue while she prepared to prove her point the only way that mattered. Rookie seasons in the WNBA are notoriously brutal. The league is faster, stronger, and exponentially more physical than anything college players face. The best players in the world, veterans who've been dominating professionally for a decade, aren't giving an inch to some hyped rookie no matter how many points she scored in college. Indiana started the season 1-8, looking completely overwhelmed, and critics were already sharpening their knives. The hot takes started flying. Maybe Geno was right. Maybe the hype was overblown. Maybe Clark was just a college star who couldn't translate. But she kept playing through the early struggles, kept pushing through double teams and physical defense, kept proving herself one game at a time. By the end of the season, everything Geno said had aged like milk left out in the Arizona sun. Clark won Rookie of the Year in an absolute landslide, receiving every single vote. She was named to the All-WNBA First Team, an honor that only a handful of rookies in league history have ever received. She set the WNBA single-season assist record, surpassing marks set by veteran point guards with years of experience. She broke attendance records in nearly every arena she visited, with some venues experiencing their highest crowds in franchise history. Broadcasts featuring her drew viewership numbers that absolutely dwarfed entire playoff games from previous years. Networks were scrambling to get more fever games on their schedule. And then came the MVP voting results. Fourth place, not third, which would have been close, not fifth, which would have technically validated the prediction, exactly fourth. Precisely where those so-called delusional fans had predicted she'd finish months earlier, when Geno was calling them clueless. The Indiana Fever, the team Geno said was all wrong for her, made the playoffs for the first time since 2016, ending an 8-year drought. Clark had taken a franchise that was widely considered one of the absolute worst in the league and turned them into a legitimate contender in a single season. She didn't need to write a response tweet. She didn't need to call Geno out in an interview. The numbers screamed louder than any comeback ever could. The receipts were public, permanent, and undeniable. What made this entire story so beautifully poetic wasn't just that Clark proved Geno wrong on a technical level. It was what her success represented for the broader landscape of women's basketball. For decades, the path to greatness in the sport ran through a very small number of elite programs. UConn, Stanford, maybe Tennessee back in the day, perhaps one or two others depending on the era. Coaches like Geno decided who mattered and who didn't. Their approval was essentially a prerequisite for stardom. If they didn't recruit you, if they didn't see something in you, then maybe you weren't as good as you thought. The system had gatekeepers, and those gatekeepers held enormous power over young players' futures and dreams. But Clark shattered that entire model into pieces. She didn't need the dynasty program. She didn't need the prestigious pedigree or the automatic national spotlight. She built her own empire from absolute scratch at a school that had never been a serious power. And in doing so, she completely rewrote the rules of how greatness happens in women's basketball. She proved that players no longer had to wait for the gatekeepers to let them in, to give them permission to be great. They could kick down the door themselves, build their own platform, create their own movement. The power had fundamentally shifted from institutions to individuals. And ironically, tragically, the man who once controlled the entire narrative was now watching from the outside, his opinions suddenly mattering less than they ever had before. By the time the 2024 Women's Final Four rolled around, even Geno had to admit the truth he'd been avoiding. In an interview during the tournament coverage, he called Caitlin Clark the best player of all time in women's basketball. Not just great, not just special, the best ever. It was a stunning reversal from someone who'd overlooked her completely in recruitment and publicly doubted her professional future just months earlier. But by that point, it genuinely didn't matter what he thought anymore. Clark had already proven everything she needed to prove to everyone who mattered. His validation, the thing she wanted so badly as a high school kid, was now completely irrelevant to her legacy. Sometimes the universe hands you a gift disguised as rejection, and you don't realize it until years later when you look back and see how everything unfolded. If UConn had recruited Caitlin Clark, maybe she would have been great. Maybe she would have won a championship or two and become another impressive name on Geno's already long list of successful players. But she also might have been molded into someone else's system, forced to play someone else's style, her creativity and boldness tempered to fit within established structures and philosophies. Instead, she went to Iowa and became exactly who she was meant to be, unapologetically bold, impossibly skilled, undeniably, authentically herself. She took shots nobody else would take. She made passes nobody else could see. She played with a freedom and joy that reminded people why they fell in love with basketball in the first place. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own career trajectory. She changed the entire landscape of women's basketball for everyone who would come after her. She proved that you don't need the traditional path to reach the mountaintop. She showed young players watching that your dream school passing on you isn't the end of your story. It might actually be the beginning of something better. She demonstrated that building your own legend outside the establishment can be more powerful than inheriting someone else's legacy. Geno Auriemma spent 30 years building an impressive fortress, brick by brick, championship by championship. Caitlin Clark walked right past that fortress and built an entire city that drew bigger crowds and generated more excitement. She never needed his approval or validation. She never needed his stamp of legitimacy or his blessing. She just needed a chance to play basketball her way. And when she got that chance at Iowa, she made absolutely certain the whole world was watching. The best part of this entire saga, she never had to clap back publicly, never had to argue or defend herself, never had to prove him wrong with words or social media posts or petty interviews. She just played basketball at the highest level possible, and that, in the end, was the loudest, most powerful statement she could have made. Sometimes silence backed by performance speaks infinitely louder than any words ever could. So here's the final question worth considering. Was Geno Auriemma's biggest recruiting mistake actually the best thing that ever happened to women's basketball? Did his oversight accidentally create something more powerful and transformative than anything that would have happened if Clark had gone to UConn and followed the traditional path? Drop your thoughts below, because this story isn't just about one player or one coach. It's about how the game is changing, how power shifts, and how sometimes the people who get overlooked end up changing everything.